Hey everybody, welcome to the next episode of the Balsa USA quarter scale Cub Build. Let's take a look and see where we're going to get to on this build. So this is what we're going to look like after this episode we're working on right now. We're going to get the fuselage sides up. We're going to get the F4 former in. We're going to get the F2 former in and the landing gear block put in place. So stay tuned. Here we go. So now the next step is going to be to go ahead and get your pieces laminated together for your landing gear doublers. Now this is the same process I use anytime I'm doing any laminating. So you'll be able to use this on any of the other laminations you have during this build. It's really pretty simple. For this process, I like to use just regular wood glue. And the reason I use just regular wood glue is because if I get any outside the piece, it makes it easy for me to go in and sand. CA tends to be a little bit harder to sand, and with the wood glue, it's going to sand off just like it was wood. So all you simply need to do is go ahead and run a bead of glue down each part. You don't want to go crazy overkill with this because it's just going to cause you more cleanup later. And then what I do at this point is I go ahead and I put my other piece on top. Get everything lined up, kind of move it around a little bit so that wood has a chance to spread. Make sure you get it perfectly lined up. And then what I do before I do anything else, right now at this spot, I go ahead and I pick it up and I wipe off any excess glue that may have pushed out between the pieces. It's going to be critically important that you make sure you wipe off any glue in these slots, because you're not going to want to have to try to clean that up later once the glue is dry. Get it all wiped off really good. And then what I simply do is I just put some weight on top of it so that it has a chance to cure while it's perfectly flat. Any other glue that squeezes out during this process, you're going to easily be able to sand off, and those will be ready to go. So use that step on the rest of your laminations, and we'll go on to the next step. Okay, so the next step is going to be to get your landing gear doublers set in place. What you're going to want to make sure you do is leave a 1/4 inch space at the front of each fuselage side. You also want to make sure that you glue those to the inside. So you can see here what I've done is I've marked the inside on both. And I would recommend doing that so you don't get confused. How you can tell the inside of the fuselage is the window frame goes toward the bottom. So there'll be a gap from the outside to the inside. So the other side is where the offset is. So on this side, there will be a hole or a gap here from the inside out. So that's how you tell the inside from the outside if you forgot to mark it earlier on. So what I'm basically going to do is I'm going to take the F2 former and I'm going to kind of put it in place to the front of the fuselage, making sure I have it all square. So that way when I line up my landing gear doubler, I know I leave enough space. So all I'm going to simply do is put that in place. Make sure that it fits properly. Everything looks good to go. And then I'm going to go ahead and glue that in place. I'm going to do that, repeat twice, once for each side. Okay, so the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and get the plywood gear mount put down on these plans. Now you'll notice what I did here was I just used a small little piece of wax paper, because at this point you're really just going to use the plans to line all this up, so you don't need to have too much of it protected. Now what I need to make sure you see here is that you've got your two grooves for your landing gear. Those are going to go face down, and they're going to go across the airframe for the landing gear to mount to. So if you look at the plans here, this section can be just a little bit confusing. So right here you see the aft edge of the plywood mount. That's this line here. And then this piece that you see here is the quarter landing gear doubler. So the landing gear mount is actually going to go lined up with this line and this line here. So it's going to look just like that. It looks a little weird when you put it down because there's a lot of stuff outside here, but you want that lined up right with the edge. So what that's going to be is where we made the landing gear doublers. This slot right here is where that's going to fit on the airframe, just like that. So here's your landing gear doubler in your slot, and everything should line up perfectly. And you'll do that for both sides. So now what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to pin this down so that it doesn't move around much on me. Get everything lined up nice and square. And for this, because I'm going to do the back side first, I'm going to put one pin in the middle. Couple of pins on here. You got to make sure that they're out of your way. And then you can see here how this is going to line up. So that'll sit on there just like that. Now what you're going to want to make sure you do when you do this part is you're going to want to make sure you use your either your 1, 2, 3 blocks or level of some sort, a builder square, to be able to make sure that this is completely square, because this is going to be critical as you build the airplane. So for this first side, I like to use the 1, 2, 3 blocks. You're going to get that placed on there, and you're going to use your 1, 2, 3 blocks to square all this up so that you know everything's nice and level. Now what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to take another block here that I just have handy and use it to set the fuselage on, so I don't have to worry about it rocking while I'm trying to do this part. The key to this whole thing is just to making sure you have your fuselage sides square. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to remove this pin and this pin, and I'm going to use my 1, 2, 3 block right in there just like that, and make sure this whole piece is completely square. Again, this is going to be critical. Make sure you get everything lined up. You want to make sure that you're all the way up against your landing gear block here, and get that all squared up. Now with the 1, 2, 3 blocks like that, that's going to allow that to be perfectly square, so that when I glue this down, everything's going to be square as I finish the rest of the build. So now what you can do is you can very carefully pull this open, and for this part I'm actually going to use thick CA, And the reason why I'm going to use thick CA is because in case there's an issue, I want to be able to have a little bit of work time so that it doesn't get too solid too fast, and I can correct any issues that I might come across. So I'm just going to run a nice bead of thick CA down that line all the way to the end. And I'm going to slide this piece right into place. Now what I would do is I would recheck it. Again, this is why I'm using thick CA for this section, because as you saw there, I bumped it a little bit, and I want to make sure that that's completely square up against that block. I want to pay attention to the fact that you don't want to move that as you build this side. Once you know that you have everything nice and square and you don't see any issues, you can leave it. And what I would do is I wouldn't use any kicker for this. I would let that dry on its own, because you want to make sure that that thick gets a chance to bond good with that wood. And just keep checking to make sure you're square while that glue sets up. Once it starts to get solid, I will use just a little bit of kicker so that I can let go of it and not have to sit there and hold it. So I'll hit that with just a little bit. And that'll keep it from moving around too much. Once you get that dry, you're going to do exactly the same thing with the other side of the fuselage. So again, your fuselage side is going to fit into your notch that's in your doubler. And it's going to go just like that. And then you're going to completely do the same thing that you just did on the other side. You're going to make sure you get it nice and square, and then you're going to glue it in place. So I'm going to go ahead and get the other fuselage side down. So for this part, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and leave these back 1, 2, 3 blocks in place, just to make sure that I remain square as I build this. And then what I'm going to do here is I'm going to remove this pin, because this one's going to be in my way. I'm going to put it over here by the fuselage, other side. And you can use any weight for this. You know, I've just happened to have a couple extra 1, 2, 3 blocks here I can put on here. You want to make sure you weight this down good, because you want to make sure that's flat up against your board so you don't get any warpage around the bottom. And what I'll do is I'm going to use the same process as I did for the other side. I'm going to bring the fuselage side in, and I'm going to go ahead and test fit it. If you don't have enough room, at this point you could turn this around the other way. You just want to make sure that you have everything square. Your fuselage side should fit into those notches fairly easy, and you want to give yourself space to work. I think we're going to be good to go there. I don't see any issues. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and get my block ready. Now that is a different size block, so I'm going to put that on there and slide it up a little bit so that it holds the back. And it really is not going to do much other than just support the aft end of the fuselage side while you get this done, so it's not moving around on you too much. And I think we're going to be good to go. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do the same thing I did before. I'm going to take these blocks here, square this up, to make sure that I'm completely square. You want to make sure that's all the way as forward as it will go. I'm going to actually grab a couple more 1, 2, 3 blocks here. This is just going to ensure my squareness from side to side. That's critical when you're putting these pieces together, that you maintain a perfectly square airframe. Any problems with squareness that you build into your airplanes are just going to come back and haunt you later when you're trying to fly it. So it's always really important before you put any glue down to make sure that you have everything perfectly square. That looks like it's going to be good to go. And so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to glue what's going to be the left side of the fuselage to the landing gear mount, just like we did on the other side, and then we can move on to start getting some formers put in place. Okay, so now the next step is going to place the F2 former. Now, I will tell you, this is going to be a tight fit, so you want to be really careful. Again, because this is balsa and this is ply, you're going to want to make sure you use thick CA on this step, not thin, and you're going to want to make sure you stay square. So what I'm going to do to make sure that I can stay square is I'm actually going to put a square up against it, and then I'm going to place the former in place. You got to start from the top here because it is a little tight. Make sure you hold your sides and just slide it right into place. If you left the proper 1/4 inch gap, as the instructions stated on your landing gear doublers, this should slide right into where it needs to go. I'm just doing a quick test fit. Make sure everything lines up. You do want that to be square with the front edge. And along the bottom here, you should have a little bit of a gap to your building board, and it should be right up against your landing gear doubler there. So you want to make sure you got this all lined up. Do this process for both sides, and what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to get it squared up with both sides. And then once I get it fit, when I do my gluing, I'm going to glue one side at a time, get it lined up and square on this side, and hit it with some kicker so it'll stay in place when I finish up the other side. So, because it's going to want to shift a little bit on you. And if you hit it with a little bit of a kicker, it'll stay in place so you can get the other side in place, and then you can hit that with some kicker. One thing I did notice on my particular build was I need a little bit more wax paper here. You want to try to avoid getting CA on your plans because it's just going to make a mess. You might need to come back later and reference something, and you don't want to ruin your plans by getting CA glue all over them. So I've got everything in place and ready to go. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab my Balsa USA Gold thick CA. I'm going to run a bead of glue down both sides. You don't need it on the bottom or the top here yet, because you'll only be gluing it to the fuselage sides. And you just waste your glue. Got a good bead of glue on both sides there. And I'm going to bring this around and work it into place. Again, this is going to be a little bit of a tight fit. So you want to go easy as you slide this down into place so that you don't throw any of your other stuff off. So you can see here I've got my F2 former glued in place. Everything is all square. I go ahead and I double check that just to make sure I verify. You're always wanting to verify squareness on these steps, because if you run into an issue, it's easily corrected now before you get too far along in the build. Good to go there. and we can move on to the F4 former. So now I'm going to go ahead and test fit the F4 former. Keep in mind that this is going to sit on top of your fuselage landing gear doublers and flush with the back edge of your fuselage side on both sides. So this will not be square as far as the building board goes. It's going to lean back. So you just have to make sure it's on top of the landing gear doubler here, and then flush all the way up to the fuselage side, and that's going to be the correct positioning. You can go ahead and get that one glued in, and we'll move on to the next step. So I hope you enjoyed this episode of the Balsa USA quarter scale Cub Build. Stay tuned, there'll be another one coming at you soon. And as always, thank you very much for watching, and happy building.